Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Stephen Kelly. I'm Chief Executive of Manufacturing Northern Ireland, the representative body on behalf of manufacturers in Northern Ireland, exactly as it says on the tin. You're very welcome along to this session this afternoon on the Trader Support Service. As we know, the UK left the EU in January, and the transition period and the implementation period ends on the 1st of January 2021. One element of that is that the agreement between the UK and the EU on its withdrawal is that there will be in existence a Northern Ireland protocol administered by a joint committee, and with that comes additional checks and burdens that may be required on goods that are travelling from Great Britain into Northern Ireland. One of the commitments from the UK government has been that businesses in Northern Ireland would continue to have unfettered access in terms of that trade. And in an effort to ensure that that trade from GB to MNI flows smoothly, they've introduced what's called the Trader Support Service. Joining us today are representatives who will be running the Trader Support Service. Frank Dunsmuir from Fujitsu and Shankar Singham, and both Shankar and Frank will take us through our slides this afternoon. Just two things to say as we begin. One is we are recording the session, and those that have registered can get a recording of it once we've uploaded after the event, alongside the slides which Frank and Shankar will be taking us through this afternoon. We are willing to try to leave some time for questions, and we would ask you to use the Q&A function that's available as part of the Zoom meeting to lodge those questions with us, and we'll do every effort we can make to try to get you some answers to those questions. If I could ask if those questions are kept as general as possible and as short as possible. We understand that obviously people have very particular business requirements and needs, and will be difficult to do this on a business by business basis at this moment in time. So if you do have questions, do put them into that Q&A, but do try to think about keeping them short and try to make sure that they're relevant to everybody who's tuning in to this session. So if I can hand over now to Frank and Shankar, and they'll take us through an introduction to the Trader Support Service.
Thanks very much, Stephen. I'm going to do the first set of slides that we have. So if we could have the slides on there, great. As I say, I will cover the first few slides, and then I'll hand over to Frank to talk about some of the operational aspects and the education piece that we have as well. So if we can go to the next slide, or the first slide. As Stephen mentioned, the Northern Ireland Protocol will be implemented in Northern Ireland January 1, 2021. And so what the TSS will do is it will ensure that that can be properly implemented as we go forward. If we can go to the next slide. The first thing we wanted to talk about was what's actually going to be changing. The transition period, as you all know, comes to an end on the 31st of December, and the Northern Ireland Protocol will take effect at the end of the transition period. This is important because there's been some discussion about phasing of the UK border for some months after January 1, 2021. That's not the case for the Northern Ireland Protocol. It will absolutely take effect January 1, 2021, so we must be ready to implement it on the 1st of Jan. The process of moving goods into and out of Northern Ireland is going to change. And in order to accommodate that change, or to help traders with that change, the government has established this free-to-use trader support service, which Fujitsu is the prime entity on, but the consortium has a number of other members. And if we can go to the next slide. So we thought it would be useful for people to understand what the TSS is and what it isn't. As I mentioned, it's a number of different members. Fujitsu is the prime, but we have people like McKinsey providing assurance. We have HGS, which is staffing up the contact center, and I'm an advisor to the consortium. We have the Institute of Exports and International Trade that are providing the educational element. So there is the way to look at TSS is there is a operational support for the customs declarations piece of this. The TSS will do that, will do those customs declarations on behalf of traders. It's a digital first service, by which we mean it's not a personalized service in the sense that you don't call up the contact center and say, I'd like to move goods now. We will have an electronic mechanism for onboarding your information. That's why registration with the TSS is so critically important. And if there's a single message from today that's really, really important, it's register with the TSS right now. Registration is very easy. It is on tradersupportservice.co.uk, and we can provide the details maybe in the chat box for people to register. But it is all going to be that way. So you can analogize it to when you buy products on Amazon. You don't call up somebody and say, I'm thinking of buying this, you know, tell me which product I should buy. You just go on there and you buy it. And it'll be a similar process here, where we're going to be asking for your information in order to do those customs declarations. All of that will be handled through the portal. Beyond the operational side, there is an education and advice piece of TSS, and we will educate and advise on topics that are broader than where we will provide operational support. So we'll be providing operational support on the customs piece of this, on the declarations piece of this. We won't be providing operational support on things like SPS and you know, some of the health certifications and so on. But when you register with the Trader Support Service, you'll be directed to the Northern Ireland Customs and Trade Academy, which will be providing a lot of that education on issues like SPS, on the new government vehicle movement service, GVMS, and other things that you will certainly need to know, but that the TSS wouldn't directly be helping you with. I mentioned the contact center earlier on. As of Monday, the contact center goes live. So they will be ready to respond to some inquiries. And the idea of the contact center is to provide that issue resolution for traders and explain the process. What TSS will not be doing is, it's not a personalized service. It's not an advisory service. So you wouldn't ask TSS, for example, should I use a particular customs relief process? Should I use warehousing? Should I do this? You will be able to get that information of what those reliefs actually are from the Northern Ireland Customs and Trade Academy information, but the TSS itself will not be directing you to those things. We will not be replacing service offered by the existing intermediary market. So, for example, there's a lot of intermediaries already involved with trade from rest of world into Northern Ireland, for example. We won't be seeking to compete with them. We need to leave in 2 years. TSS lasts for 2 years. We need to leave the Northern Ireland trade function and the customs support function, you know, in better shape than we found it. And we certainly have no intention to hollow out the existing intermediaries. And we won't be raising that non-standard documentation I mentioned in terms of health certificates and other licenses and those sorts of things. If we can go to the next slide. And the next slide, sorry. So what we've done here is envision 5 different typical trader journeys and see how the Northern Ireland Protocol affects them. So Great Britain to Northern Ireland, which is where I think it's probably some of the biggest changes. The goods will be subject to new declarations, and they may be subject to duties if they're considered at risk of moving to the EU. So Trade Support Service will be involved in the process of doing those customs declarations on behalf of traders. With respect to Northern Ireland to GB, there's no additional processes, paperwork, or restrictions. It will work much as it does now, except in very limited circumstances where the EU is a signatory to international obligations, or you have duty suspension, or you have export controls. So this is things like if your goods are covered by the CITES Convention on Endangered Species or the Kimberley diamond mining process, those sorts of things. So it's not a major group of items, but you will have to make sure that you don't fall into that category, because if you do, then declarations will be required. Northern Ireland to and from Ireland, what the Northern Ireland Protocol does is ensure that that's completely unaffected. No new checks at the border, no paperwork, no tariffs, no regulatory checks of any kind. Northern Ireland to and from rest of world, broadly speaking, as it does today, the differences are that Northern Ireland will benefit from future UK free trade agreements. There will be benefits, from those UK trade agreements, such as the Japan agreement that has just been negotiated, where there are differences between the UK-Japan agreement and the EU-Japan agreement. You've got two different tariff schedules that will apply. You've got the UK global tariff and the European common external tariff. And we'll talk in the next slide about how that will work. And then the final area is transit. Transit's very important for people, particularly the GB to Northern Ireland route via the Holyhead Dublin channel. And in that channel, the TSS will support the that particular transit routes, but we won't support necessarily all transit routes, particularly the ones from Europe, because we don't necessarily have the authorizations for those. If we can go to the next slide. So if we go through these in turn, first of all, GB to NI, there will be a need for import declarations, and there will be safety and security declarations that will be raised typically by the hauliers and the freight forwarders. And Frank will sort of explain how that works in a second. So the way that traders would interface with TSS is that you'd register. We would then know who you are. You would apply for your GB process. Sorry, if we can just go back to the previous slide. I haven't quite finished that. You will register for your GB EORI number. We should point out that you will be auto-enrolled for the, and I think Frank may mention this in a later slide, but you'll be auto-enrolled for the XI EORI, the prefixed XI EORI number that you need for Northern Ireland. On the 23rd of November, there's an auto-enrollment process. So there's a real motivation to register quickly now, so that you can be part of that process. Tariffs may need to be paid on goods that are at risk of moving. That is subject to ongoing negotiations in the Joint Committee between the UK and the EU. I'm afraid we're not going to be able to give you total clarity on exactly what the Joint Committee is going to say, because obviously that is subject to a negotiation. But where we can, we'll give you as much information as we can so that you can get as ready as you can be for this date. And then finally, Northern Ireland under the protocol is part of the All Ireland SPS zone and regulatory zone. So there will be a need for SPS checks for veterinary certificates and for other issues that are related to that. If we can go to the next slide now. So moving goods from Northern Ireland to GB, no additional paperwork restrictions, no tariffs. But export declarations required in these very limited sets of circumstances that I talked about. And if we can go on to the next slide, the third route, which is Northern Ireland to Ireland, unaffected. Anything that you do now, you'd need to do in the future. Because there is a single island of Ireland zone for SPS and TBT type regulatory checks, businesses in Northern Ireland will anyway be satisfying the European regulatory requirements like CE marking, for example, labeling, those sorts of things. Go to the next slide. So from the perspective of goods coming into Northern Ireland from rest of world, if goods are considered at risk, then they would be basically satisfying the European common external tariff, and then you may need to have a process to show that your goods have not traveled into the EU, so that you can claim any rebate from that tariff, if that tariff applies. For other goods that are not at risk, then you would be applying the UK global tariff. So if we go to the next slide. So this is the transit procedures. Transit will continue to operate. Now, the way transit operates is you have an authorized consignee, an authorized consignor, you have a transit guarantee that needs to be handled, and transit needs to be discharged at authorized locations. So there are ongoing conversations about transit requirements from continental Europe and how that works, and the UK land bridge. But I think for most traders who are looking at the GB to NI route and are using the Holyhead Dublin route, we will support that. We know that's a very important route. There's a lot of information that the Northern Ireland Customs Trade Academy is providing on specifically how transit works. The one thing I'd say about the SPS checks on transit is they do still apply. Just because your goods are in transit doesn't mean that they won't be subject to SPS, and they'll be subject to SPS for the most part in the European member state that you first enter, which will therefore mean an SPS check in an authorized facility in Ireland, in Dublin. If we go to the next slide. So one of the reasons it's really important to get people to register is they may not realize that they're involved in quotes international trade or trade that will require customs type processes, because they think of themselves as trading entirely within the UK customs territory. And while that will remain true, some processes will be needed, and that's why registration is required. So you could be a business in Northern Ireland that buys goods from GB, and you may think that you have no reason to fill in a customs form. And there's an example that we gave there of a construction company in Derry buying tools from a supplier in Cardiff. That is a movement that requires customs declarations. So you do need to register, and you do need to do customs declarations in that case. If you've got a brewery in Yorkshire selling to bars and restaurants all over the UK, that UK entity may think, or that GB entity may think, that they don't need to worry about this, but actually they do if they're servicing bars and restaurants in Belfast, for example. This is important because depending on the terms of trade that you have, and we would, as well as registration, we would encourage you to immediately start talking to your suppliers in GB if you're a Northern Ireland importer. Really important that you do that, because it may well be that if you are on a particular Incoterm like delivered duty paid, that's the one Incoterm where this applies, then your GB supplier is the one that has to do the customs declaration. They're the one that needs to be onboarded into the TSS system. Computer chain with outlets across the UK, similar things would apply. And then particularly I want to focus on private hauliers and freight forwarders. The way our system works is that they will essentially provide the safety and security declaration, from which we will then build with the information we have from the traders as a result of their registrations, we'll build the information you need to do a simplified frontier declaration. You will be using smaller traders who don't have the authorizations like CFSP and others. You'll be using our TSS authorizations to do that. So it's critically important that hauliers and freight forwarders are A, registered, and B, understand what they need to do, and are also communicating to their supplier, to their customers and people who are literally putting the goods on the trucks, that those people need to be registered. Those people need to have their information provided to TSS so the truck can actually move through the terminal. So we go to the next slide, please. And then what support is actually available from the TSS, and then we go to the next slide. And I'll ask Frank to now take over and talk about the actual operations of TSS.
Thank you, Shankar. And so I'll take you through a number of sections. First of all, a recap of the routes that Shankar talked through there in terms of the ones that TSS primarily supports, and how you can get support for the other routes that aren't a primary support from the TSS. Then I'll spend a lot more time talking about the main service from the TSS. So I'll pick a key example of the type of trade that TSS will support, and take you through a bit more detail about what that looks like, so you get a clearer understanding, I hope, of how the TSS will work. Then we'll talk about some next steps. What can you do today? And I'll finish off with a high-level timeline of the activities that TSS is going through in the phases as it heads towards the end of the year in terms of being ready for service. So first of all, looking at the nature of the routes that are served by TSS and how you can get support for the ones that aren't a primary support by the TSS. So the first two are the classic routes that TSS will support. Its main mandate is to support the movement of goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. So we put a construction company there buying tools. So not necessarily controlled goods or goods that need licenses or anything like that, but standard goods like that we will support in creating declarations for those movements as needed. As Shanker mentioned earlier, we are not creating the licenses, and by license I mean things like health and safety certificates for certain food and plant type products, but we are looking after the declarations for those goods. The second one is transit. For those not familiar with the term, the customs term of transit, if you're moving from one customs region to another and you're moving through a third customs region, you can transit through that region without having to declare your goods in that particular region. So this would apply if you're moving from Great Britain through the Republic of Ireland, so it's the Holyhead route to Dublin, and then up to Northern Ireland. So the actual destination of the goods would be to Northern Ireland. So it could be Manchester to Holyhead to Dublin, and then driving up to Belfast, for example. That would typically run under the transit process. And again, that would fall nicely in the remit of the TSS. Transit, though, is a much broader function. It covers routes as far away as China, etc. And typically, you need to have authorizations within those countries to be able to offer transit services. So typically, the TSS won't be offering transit or the support of transit declarations beyond GB, and that would include mainland the EU as well. And then rest of the world, so that exists today as a service. So anyone in Northern Ireland that's trading, buying or selling with the rest of the world, that's non-EU at the moment, will no doubt have customs capabilities today and customs intermediaries helping them. And we expect that to continue pretty much as a function going forward. Next slide, please. So where can you get support for the routes that we talked about there that aren't a primary function of the TSS? Local intermediaries do exist. So we can recommend local intermediaries. There are lists of them on gov.uk. I say recommend, I don't mean recommend here's the best one, etc. But we can point you to the list of the intermediaries that are available on the gov.uk site, and we can provide information for traders with more complex requirements in terms of controlled goods like food and plant, etc. On advice and guidance on where to go for more help and information in terms of license requirements and more complex needs like that. And next slide. So I use the term primary service from TSS. So we in terms of primary service, the TSS does have a key role on certain routes of absolutely creating the customs declarations for those goods movements. But for the other routes that we talked about, where you might have an intermediary or you may be doing some of these procedures yourself, we are still supporting that market. So intermediaries and in-house customs capabilities should also think about or should also register on TSS. You get access to education and information, and things are changing even for rest of the world, as I mentioned before, imports and exports. Yes, they're happening today, but going forward, there'll be a nature of, there'll be the requirement to understand if those goods are going into the UK market or they have a risk of going into the EU market. So there's a notion of a dual tariff system that would need to be managed for those types of goods. So we're happy to help existing intermediaries develop their capabilities and their understanding of those changes as well. but predominantly within the TSS, it's advice and guidance. Yes, we can provide customs experience on customs procedures, but as Shanker said, it's not a customs consultancy, so we won't be giving advice on whether you should open a customs warehouse, for example, bonded warehouse or anything like that. But we can point to information, and we can give general information around the sort of needs and requirements for those types of products. We are creating declarations, and we are helping and supporting the existing intermediary market. And on the next slide, I'll talk you through a specific example. So I'll spend a little bit more time on this particular one. And what I'd like to do here is give you an illustration of what the TSS would look like in a typical scenario of moving goods. Just going to sneeze. Excuse me. So Shanker was saying earlier that it's a digital first service, and just a little explanation on what we mean by digital first service. First of all, the typical volumes that may be required to be handled for the movement of goods between GB and Northern Ireland could be as many as 30 million declarations. So it's a huge number to suddenly step up to and manage within a few months. So any service that's based on a more traditional help desk or contact center type design, where you would have a scenario that somebody phones up a contact center and says, I'm buying the following goods from an office in Reading or supplier in Reading, can you give me some declarations, please? It's going to be a very long, drawn out and cumbersome process. It's not going to be very customer friendly, and it's going to require thousands of agents who would be impossible to source in that time period. So it needs to have a smarter solution, which means a digital solution, and one that in today's age we're probably more familiar than we expect we are. Shanker mentioned Amazon. When you buy something on Amazon, if you're a member of Amazon, you browse through their portfolio of goods, you pick the one you want, you press a button, and it takes a payment from you and sends you the goods the next day or the day after. It's a fantastic service. But in order to process that request from you to process your purchase, it's looking at master data, what we call master data, which it's checking that you are an Amazon account holder. It's checking you've got a valid bank details to take the payment. It's checking your address, and it's checking other things about you and the nature of your transactions before it completes that process. So it's referring to lots of different bits of information, and we're familiar with that service, and we're familiar with the term digital. In a similar fashion, the TSS needs to take advantage of modern digital technology to be able to serve that size of market. And the way we've looked at this is, as I mentioned before, the typical purchasing and supply chain route is not, for imports, is not a trader, a buyer, arranging for the purchase, the transport, and the customs themselves. You don't typically do all of those things yourself. The typical process is you'll contact your supplier, who will arrange the transport. Not always, but it's a typical model. And a combination of supplier and transport typically also looks after much of, if not all of, the customs arrangement as well. It depends on the terms, but a significant part of the customs process will be handled there. So if we look at this scenario, you're buying some goods from a supplier in GB. They're coming directly to Northern Ireland via a Liverpool ferry or something like that. And the process looks something like this. The carrier, the supplier that you're purchasing the goods from, arranges for the shipment with either a shipping agent or a haulier of some sort. The carrier we've called in this process here. It's their responsibility to first of all raise a safety and security declaration. And that's an entry declaration into Northern Ireland. So the vehicle can't enter Northern Ireland without that safety and security declaration. And that simply lists what's on the vehicle in very brief form. We can provide that for the haulier. So that's the first thing we will do. The second thing we will do is we will then create what we call a simplified frontier declaration for that entire shipment, all of the things in that vehicle. So that allows the vehicle to then cross the the sea and enter into Northern Ireland under customs controls. So the hauliers told us what they're shipping. We've created the safety and security declaration, and then we've used what we call the master data, like the Amazon model, to help us create a simplified frontier declaration for that transfer. Once we know that the goods have arrived in your depot or your facilities, etc., we can then arrange for the next step, which is called the supplementary declaration. And that's the bit where the process gets closed out. And in order to do that, we will send you electronically a request for further information that allows us to fill the more comprehensive supplementary declaration. So it's there that you will tell us you have 15 of these and 10 of those. These are the commodity codes, and these are the weights and values. And we use that to close out the declaration. So looking at it from a trader's perspective, in that typical scenario, you're having to confirm the goods that you got, you received, rather than being involved right at the very beginning in the process. It's reduced the effort and administration on the trader. And it also fits in with a typical model for the supply chain industry. Of course, there are variations. There absolutely are variations to that, but it's a typical model. And as we've talked to the freight forwarding industry, it is something that they recognize and understand. And in many ways, it's important for them to keep control of those consignments on those vehicles, so that they will have as well as a legal responsibility for the security declaration, they're obviously very interested in making sure that that vehicle does cross the sea and doesn't come back and get rejected from the port. So that's a very high level view of a typical transaction, one of the core processes that TSS would support and how it would support it. I was just trying to move the slide forward. Could you move the slide forward, please, Connor? So what happens next? And the next slide. Thank you. So the first thing is just re-emphasizing registration. Even if you're not going to use the Trader Support Service for declarations, it has a number of advantages. So you can get training courses, you can get updates on what's happening in terms of the latest news around government developments on some of the outstanding policy items. I noticed 1 or 2 questions about at-risk goods coming up there. Those are still in process at the moment. So as those discussions and negotiations develop, then the TSS will be also providing bulletins on that sort of information. Do apply for an EORI number. It's for those that aren't aware of it, you need an EORI number in order to be able to trade between regions. So if you're buying goods from GB into Northern Ireland, you will need what's called an XI EORI number, which recognises the Northern Ireland status there. So please make sure you register, and if you're registered to the TSS, it will automatically, well, not it, but HMRC will be using that registration database to make sure that it allocates an XI EORI number to you as well. We mentioned there, take additional professional information. We do lots of seminars and discussions one-to-one with organizations. There are lots of complex questions. Which route should I take? Where should I declare my goods? How do I know they're not at risk, et cetera, et cetera? And some of those are very, very important questions, and they do step very clearly into business models and supply chain models that you need to carefully consider in terms of optimization. So the TSS really isn't set up to do that level of detail with you. We'll do the best we can, but it isn't set up specifically for that consultancy type arrangement. So if you have more complex routes, you may need to think about additional professional help on that. And on the next slide. So in terms of phases, we do hope to get out around about 3 phases of seminars, I was going to say. So this is the first phase of seminars, which is an awareness seminar. The second seminar sometime in November will be a bit more detailed, taking you through this is what the TSS looks like in some more detail. This is the sort of data requirements and sort of specifics. And then the third phase will be around about final readiness preparations and of course answering questions around that. So our program of work, you read in October, is very much a registration and basic how to training guides, customs 101 type information, which we highly recommend, whatever your involvement in the process, that you do at least the basic training, because it makes you familiar with the language and the terminology that's being used, etc. Phase 2 is the contact center during November starts to come to light. So that will be contactable, for want of a better expression, sometime in November. And we start to publish the second round of education. I might be struggling for the right word. Second round of education, which is more detail around things like tariffs, tariff codes and classification of goods, and which goods are a categorization of goods, such as which ones are at risk, not risk, sorry, which ones may or may not need special licenses, etc. And then December onwards is essentially the contact center is up and running, and the main system comes online, targeting around about mid-December, etc., to start serving the community. And the next one, please. So overview of key training modules, and you'll see this on the course. So all of them are pre-recorded. There are pre-recorded webinars. There are standalone how-to guides and documents that you can access, etc. So there's a range of documentation and training available. It's provided by the Institute of Exports, a highly professional organisation. They're running the UK Customs Academy at the moment, which is a government-funded training camp for customs intermediaries, because obviously we need to develop that market, that capability in the market. So as I mentioned before, October is more about introductions. November is more about some of the more detail about the nature of goods, the tariff codes, and how that works. And then as we move into December, it's more of a step-by-step guide about how the process works under different scenarios itself. So there is a lot to cram in within those 3 months. So I highly recommend that you start familiarizing yourself with some of that literature as soon as possible. And I think that's our final slide. Is that right, Connor? Yes, that was a good guess.
Frank and Shankar, thanks for that. And thanks for keeping it quite brief as well, to allow for some conversation with quite a lot of questions that have been coming in, which I'm sure you're used to now at this stage. I'll maybe start with just some of my own, because I'm chair, I'm allowed to do this. Thanks for the timeline there at the end. I mean, there is some talk about the go live being in and around third week of December. Is that the kind of timeline that we're aiming towards, that everything's ready and people can start getting stuff generated by that third week and around the 21st of December?
Yes, but please get prepared before that. So whilst, if you like, the service really launches in the latter part of December, it gives precious little time to then start at that point. Make sure you're registered. And in early November, in the next week, the second phase of the portal should be there, so you can start loading what's called master data. I won't go through all of the details of what master data is, but that is the ability to start preloading information about you, your organization, the type of components you have, which enables us to automate the service for you. Enables you to automate that service for you. So the preparation really starts in November, early November.
And that's a key message, really. Yeah. That's a key message, really, because we're all in our daily lives, we tend to try to leave things to the last minute where we can anyway. But I think earlier in Shankar's conversation, we talked about the contact center being available from next week. And people shouldn't be looking at the 1st of January as their time to take action. They should be really looking at the action now. Is that correct?
That is exactly correct. And I think what we want you to do is the contact center will be live on Monday to support registrations. So not necessarily for detailed customs questions, but the registration piece is really important. So the things to do right now are register on the Trader Support Service at tradersupportservice.co.uk if you haven't already. Get your GB EORI number, because if you haven't got one of those, because that's what will be used to auto-enroll people who are registered with their XI prefixed EORI number. Talk to your suppliers, because it may well be that you need to have a conversation about what terms of trade you're going to be using. In terms of the data, we need two sets of data. One is to do the simplified frontier declaration, which is the master data that Frank talked about. There is some additional data you need for the supplementary declaration. There's certain things that you can do right now to get ready for that. One is we will need the import commodity codes that are used for those products. So we will need to know what those are. So doing that work now to find out what those codes are. If you're not engaged in international trade, you may not have had to look at this before, but that is an important element. And then beyond that, what we need for the supplementary declaration are things like invoices and volumes and weights and values of goods, which you will have. So those are the kinds of immediate issues, like today issues that people need to be thinking about.
Okay, I'll start going through some of the questions that we've received. We got some in advance, so I'll take those first, and then we'll go through the Q&A answers for everyone. Is there a simple guide available to share with GB suppliers? Because obviously a lot of work has been done here with NI firms, trying to make sure that they're aware and prepared. But obviously, the GB suppliers to those NI firms won't know anything about this largely. So is there something that is available and can be shared with those GB suppliers?
So there is a fair amount of guidance the government has put out, HMRC has put out for all traders in the UK, including the GB traders as well. But what I would say is the other thing that I think is really important to do now in terms of talking to your suppliers is telling them to onboard and register with the Trader Support Service, because once they're onboarded, they will then have access to all of that training and material, and they will then be aware of what the processes are. So that's a way of getting them on board. So part of the discussion, you have a discussion with your GB traders. You also will be having a discussion with your freight forwarders and your hauliers and people like that. Those are really important conversations to start right now. And everyone should be registered on the Trader Support Service, because that's the way that you can get the training, and that's the way that we have visibility over you.
Okay, I have a very long and complex question about stuff moving from Italy and China and all that sort of stuff. So we'll spare you the detail of it. But I think in summary, what they're asking is, how do firms handle imports when it is currently impossible to know where the final destination of those products will be?
Well, an import coming from anywhere in the world, so it depends where it's from. So if you look at if the import's coming from GB, then you're going to have to do customs declarations in the way that we said, the traded journey that is GB to Northern Ireland. Once the product has done all those things, has done the full the import declaration, paid whatever tariff is applicable, if a tariff is applicable, it's in free circulation in Northern Ireland. So if it's then going on to Ireland, you don't have to worry about that piece of it, because that moves freely. If it's coming from rest of world non-EU, then it depends on if you can't show that it's not at risk, then you'll be submitting a customs declaration. You'd be submitting a customs declaration anyway for those types of products, but you'd be doing it based on the European Common External Tariff, not the UK Global Tariff, unless the good's not at risk, in which case the UK Global Tariff would apply. And then you might think about a rebate if you've got evidence that it didn't go into Ireland. If the good's coming from Ireland, then there's nothing. You don't need to worry about that at all. It goes straight in, no process. And if it's coming from elsewhere in Europe, and there's some interesting issues about products that are coming from continental Europe directly into Northern Ireland, potentially via Dublin, where no customs process actually has to be done, which is a unique and interesting feature of the Northern Ireland Protocol. So that's how you handle all those different movements.
And I suppose the advice to that questioner would be to there are other sources of advice to Invest NI, through Intertrade Ireland and others, and there's grants available to kind of look at those complex journeys that will assist them with the the engagement with the Trader Support Service as well.
Yeah.
For traders and businesses to avail of the TSS, will they require any specific custom software, or is it simply access to emails? Frank, that's probably one for you.
Yes, you shouldn't need any custom software for using the TSS. So you either access through the portal, where you can upload your information and your particular transactions and goods movements, or if you're moving large volumes of items, then typically you'll be sending that data in the form of an upload file, which is typically a spreadsheet file, what's called a CSV file. So as long as we can give you that information of the structure of that file, then you can upload your information in that process. And we expect most of the larger organizations to be doing that, using the spreadsheet file.
It's interesting, the whole world seems to work on that in Microsoft Excel.
Yeah.
And even the TSS, there's an engagement there as well. Will TSS assist Northern Ireland companies with the process of goods in transit for goods coming from the EU via the GB land bridge? And there's been a couple of questions in and around that. I know it was covered in your slides as well, but just to confirm that, please.
Yeah, so basically with transit, what you need in transit is you need the authorized consignor or authorized consignee and the transit guarantee, and you need authorizations for these things that TSS has will have by January 1, 2021 for the GB to Northern Ireland via Ireland route. So the transit piece is the via Dublin route. So we'll have that and we'll support that. What we don't have is the relevant authorizations for continental Europe into Northern Ireland, and therefore, while we'll advise you on it and we'll explain how it works to traders, you'll need to get your own transit, worked out in that way, and you'll need to provide your transit guarantee and determine how you handle authorized consignor processes.
And that's the same for a GB-based company that would be bringing stuff in themselves. I mean, it's the same process for them. The difference is that TSS will assist with getting it across to Northern Ireland, and that will smooth that process through.
Yeah.
We order spare parts to repair televisions throughout the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. All parts arrive at our one location, which is an MNI. Almost all of these parts come from the EU. If we continue to order parts from the EU, will there be any customs processes at all for those parts that are to remain in Northern Ireland or to travel across the border to be fitted in televisions in the Republic of Ireland? So that's really a question around an NI-based company getting all its parts from the EU. Half of what the parts are used for is to stay in Northern Ireland, and half go to the Republic of Ireland. And where's the customs interface with that piece?
It's going to depend on the route, I think. So if those parts are shipped directly into Northern Ireland from Rotterdam or something like that, Zeebrugge, then that will be an intra-EU movement. And if it's transited across Great Britain mainland into Northern Ireland, then it will need a customs transit declaration to cover that route as well. So it will depend on the route. I don't know, Shankar, if there's anything.
Yeah, I just say, I mean, with these routes, customs tends to follow logistics as opposed to the other way around. So it may well be that the route, a route that would avoid a customs declaration, which would be a route from EU to Dublin to Northern Ireland, for example, where there would be a customs process, is just not feasible, or it's just very expensive. And therefore, people want to use the land bridge. In continental Europe, transit is very frequently used for movements from Northern Europe to Southern Europe via Switzerland, for example, which is not part of the European Union. It's a very normal process, actually, in continental Europe. And I suspect that what will happen is people will, unless the logistics changes and there are more ferry routes in other directions, I expect what people will do is will use transit through the UK land bridge for some of these routes.
So the secret is to register with the TSS and to get the training and advice there, just outside of it.
Yes, absolutely, that will help.
Do I require onward processing relief to have products processed temporarily in Great Britain? And what do I do with products there on the 1st of January 2021?
So you don't. So if you've got a product coming from GB that is in essentially it's been produced in GB, or it's a result of some manufacturing process that occurs in GB. Once it goes from there into Northern Ireland, you would typically have to do a customs declaration for it in the way that we've outlined. So the way to do that is even if it's going, I mean, there's some special rules for a warehouse to warehouse type operation, or a outward processing relief, a product that's in outward processing relief going to import processing relief, inward processing relief in Northern Ireland. But TSS will support the basic trader journey, and the basic trader journey is the GB to NI route, subject to a little caveat about, or little addition with respect to transit through Dublin, through Holyhead, Dublin. If you're doing warehouse to warehouse, or you're using reliefs of some kind, it makes it more difficult for us to do a simplified frontier declaration using our authorizations. But if you're doing that, if that's your system, then you will almost certainly have your own authorizations, and you can use those in the process. I don't know, Frank, if you want to add something to that.
So if people are already using onward processing relief, it's a system they should be continue to use.
They continue to use it. Yeah.
I think it's an interesting one. So going from NI to GB, if parts are going from Northern Ireland to GB, typically they would move, if not control goods of any sort, they'll move freely from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. They get processed and made into something in Great Britain. But as Shanka was saying, there will need to then be a declaration to move it back to Northern Ireland for either final finishing or distribution, etc. But again, we can do that process within the TSS. But how inward or outward processing relief works for that, I think, will depend on the nature of the processing that's going on. So it's probably one for a little bit more detailed analysis of what you're trying to achieve ultimately with that processing relief. It's probably not that straightforward an answer, but
okay, we're down to the last 32 questions here. So, I registered a couple of weeks ago, have not heard anything since. I didn't offer me any user ID, etc., etc., etc. Can you explain to people who've already registered, and I think there's about some 4,000 firms have already signed up, what they expect to happen next?
Yeah, so when the first part of the registration process is simply that we know who you are, and the most important thing is the signpost to the Northern Ireland Customs and Trade Academy, and to get the training and to understand how these processes are going to work. So what we will also be doing is when you register, you'll receive you'll receive some communications from TSS in the form of a sort of weekly bulletin kind of thing that explains the processes that you need to think about, and what you need to think about, and when you need to think about it. So you will get that, but there will be there's a process by which there will be another way for you to submit the master data and submit the information as we go forward. So you will be receiving something. So don't feel like it's gone into a black hole and you can't get any more information. You will be receiving information, and you should at the very minimum have received the indications to the Northern Ireland Customs and Trade Academy, the training material.
Will a haulier be responsible to upload the information based on the safety and security declarations which they complete, or is this a separate declaration that needs completed?
So that will be the haulier, yes. And they unless they've offloaded that to somebody else, they typically are responsible for it. So it's their responsibility, the carrier responsible for creating the safety and security declaration. So they do have to do that.
We've kind of, and it's kind of the next question is really the basics, or the complications of an all island market and all islands market as well. So construction company here, we're based in Northern Ireland. Manufacture products for installation and sites at NI, ROI, and back in the UK mainland. And the kind of, how do they tailor their declarations to deal with this end user profile? I think the answer to that's largely about understanding those journeys. Firstly, registering with the system, but probably also beginning to speak with the likes of Intertrade Ireland and others to kind of look at those processes to simplify them in some respects. Would that be correct?
Mm-hmm.
Either Intertrade Ireland or Invest NI or just any customs advisor, whether that's an accountant or law firm or whatever. That's so TSS we won't be providing that kind of strategic advice as to what is best for you in terms of your arrangements. What we will do is explain what the arrangements are and what the possibilities are in our training. But ultimately, you have to make that decision, yourself as to what makes sense. But again, to the extent that that system entails trader, goods moving from GB to NI, it will need declarations, and we'll do those declarations for the trader.
Yeah. The main impact for organisations like that is if you don't know where the goods are going at the point of import, so they could end up in a different locations. Is whether those goods are classed at risk at the point of importing. So that's probably the main implication. But once they're imported, as Shanker said earlier, that construction can happen in Northern Ireland or Republic of Ireland once they've been managed through customs, as it were. And indeed, you can then also transfer them back to GB that bit more freely. But it depends on the at-risk process as to what the implication is in terms of duties on those goods.
And it's maybe worth, I'll just jump ahead a couple of questions in the sequence that I have them here. And there are some questions here about what could an at-risk product actually be. And I think the first answer to that is that it's still subject to negotiation with the EU. Certainly we've been asked for information in the last 24 hours from HMRC to try to help with those discussions that are taking place behind closed doors at the moment. But can you give even a basic sort of guide into what those may potentially be, Shanker?
Yeah. So I mean, again, we would say that this is still subject to negotiation, so we can't give an absolute answer on this. But I think it's the way it is envisaged that this decision, that this at-risk, not at-risk decision would be made. You can think logically about how it could be made, and I think where you end up if you do that is the evidence that you would provide about your movements is going to be critical. One way or the other, it's going to be critical, and therefore ensuring that you have good visibility over where your goods are moving is going to be crucial, and it's going to be a determinant of whether goods are not at risk or at risk. I know there's been some media speculation about the fact that it would be based on the tariff classification of the goods. I just want to make it clear that that's probably not what it will be. And so you shouldn't sit back and wait and think there's some external process that's going to sort of help you with this. It really is going to depend on how well you can evidence the movement of your goods. Because from the perspective of the EU, what the EU cares about is that they protect the integrity of the single market and the customs union. And so if somebody doesn't have any visibility into their goods movements, that's potentially going to be a big threat to the EU, and therefore they're more likely to say that we're going to say that's all at risk, because we just want to make sure that our market is our single market is protected. So at the end of the day, it all comes down to evidence.
Yeah. There's a question here about goods moving NI to GB, duty suspension, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the simple answer to that is that there is unfettered access for NI goods in the rest of the UK marketplace. Mm-hmm. So with the exception of an exit summary declaration that may still be negotiated away, there won't be any requirement for duty suspension, for customs declarations, safety and security declarations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Will TSS support goods from EU to NI? Are special transits arrangements required through GB? We've kind of answered that question already. Certainly in assisting with the stuff via Dublin, but stuff going GB directly into NI will require these processes anyway. Question here about online shopping, which it'll be fun to find out the answer to this myself. The online shopping vendors, including Amazon and eBay, in GB selling directly to customers in NI, also need to fill a declaration or use the TSS.
So the issue of e-commerce is a complicated one, because there are provisions in the Northern Ireland Protocol that would seem to exempt certainly B2C type e-commerce type activities, and that is still to be negotiated. That's still to be concluded in the joint committee. But again, applying logic, it would be odd if e-commerce business to consumer movement, where you've got the consumer in Northern Ireland, basically it's a Northern Ireland household, having to do customs declarations and claim rebates and so forth under the ordinary terms of the at-risk provisions of the Northern Ireland Protocol. So we'll have to see how that develops in the joint committee. But I would think that there would be certainly some sort of a different approach to B2C e-commerce would be applicable.
Back to the at-risk piece. So EU goods but purchased from a GB supplier, would they be viewed as at risk, or because the customs and the tariff potential has already been dealt with, has that already been resolved?
So again, it depends on the precise route that they are following. If you've got EU goods that are essentially transiting GB and they're subject to a transit movement into NI, then that would be a transit process that would apply, and you wouldn't need anything beyond, in addition to that. If, on the other hand, they're being landed in GB such that they're in GB free circulation, or they're being processed and transformed in GB such that they're in GB free circulation, then for their movements into Northern Ireland, you would need to do customs declarations, and you would need that, depending on the terms of trade between the GB entity and the Northern Ireland entity, one or the other would be doing the customs declarations. NI, in all cases, except for delivered duty paid, in which case the GB entity would be doing the declaration. So the simple answer to what you need to do now, if you're in that situation, is get both the GB and NI trader registered on TSS, so the right person can provide the information.
Sure, but it seems to be that your GB supplier supplying you duty paid would make life easier.
In some, it kind of depends. It depends if you're a small Northern Ireland company and your GB supplier is a very large, well resourced entity, then you may find that in your conversations between supplier and importer, that the GB entity says, look, we want to do DDP because we want to make sure that the goods are flowing. So that may be a reality, but we understand that there are lots of Northern Ireland entities that are importing from relatively small GB suppliers, in which case that won't necessarily apply. So I think you're going to have all of the above in terms of the Incoterms that people will use. Okay,
I have a question here about VAT, and there was news on VAT published from HMRC on Monday of this week, and if people get our emails, you'll have links through to that stuff already. In terms of VAT, are NI goods still treated as before, so we can zero rate, or do we need to register in the EU?
So there is a bit of confusion about this. The UK position is, and what was released on Monday, says that there won't be a separate Northern Ireland VAT registration number. So you will use your ordinary UK VAT registration number. However, there will be alignment of Northern Ireland VAT to EU VAT, so the Island of Ireland will not have differential VAT arrangements. There is an implication for this, obviously, on what can be claimed back and how the sort of claim back process will work for VAT. My understanding is that there will be further guidance coming out from HMRC on precisely how that works.
Yeah, I think that's true. We were a number of us were on a call with HMRC yesterday, and there is the top line position has been published and circulated, but the practicalities of it are still to be shared with everyone. I've signed up for an EORI number. Do I have to do anything else to identify that we are an NI company? I think the answer to that is at this point, no. But
other than signing up to the trust, the
Trader Support Service, of course. But there is an ongoing discussion about what is a Northern Ireland qualifying good.
Right, exactly. So if you are sending goods from Northern Ireland to GB, and your question is, how do I take advantage of unfettered access? In other words, the trader journey we outlined, where you don't have to really do anything different. That will apply to Northern Ireland qualifying goods. Northern Ireland qualifying goods will be defined very broadly at the beginning of this process. So basically anything in free circulation in Northern Ireland will be a Northern Ireland qualifying good. HMRC will be releasing some anti-avoidance type measures and guidelines, because obviously having such a broad definition of what is a Northern Ireland qualifying good will have an implication on the potential for people to use that to circumvent the UK's rules, GB rules, and so some sort of anti-avoidance mechanism will have to be in place as well.
Okay, in terms of, obviously the negotiations are ongoing at the moment about a future relationship between the UK and the EU. But what if that goes wrong? What if there's no deal, no trade deal at the end of this year? Does this process and these services still apply and are still in place?
Yeah, so the answer to that is absolutely yes. The Northern Ireland Protocol will be implemented regardless of whether there is a deal or no deal. The only impact of deal or no deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol and on everything that we've talked about is that if there is a deal, there's sort of three things that may happen. You could have a deal with zero tariffs and zero quantitative restrictions, which is what we all hope we will get, in which case the applicable tariff that would have to be paid for those movements, the customs declarations GB to NI, the customs debt would be zero. So that's one scenario. The other scenario is there's no deal and there's therefore a tariff, and so that does become an issue. It also becomes an issue because if there's no deal, there's no zero quantitative restrictions, and that has an implication on agricultural trade between GB and NI, because those tariffs can be quite high. And then there's a third scenario, which is there is a deal. It is a zero tariff deal, but you then need to think about whether the rules of origin in that deal satisfy, whether your particular movement benefits from the rules of origin in that deal such that you can take advantage of the preferential rate of zero. And that is the case for most things, but there will be some things where that may not be the case. So particularly things like cars, where you've got a lot of production from outside of the EU and the UK that goes into a manufacturing process in GB, that then cars then exported into Northern Ireland. There may be an issue there where you can't take advantage of the rate. So if you're in the automotive import business, that is worth thinking about. And depending on the rate, it may mean that the products come in a different way into Northern Ireland.
Yeah, and later on in the questions, part of one of the questions is about how do we prove the movement if there are no outbound checks. So at this point in time, the UK have said on no circumstances will there be any fettering of NI to GB trade. But there is still a question mark amongst businesses, at least, about how do they do that if there are no outbound checks?
Well, I think your question is about the related to the sort of anti-avoidance measures that the UK government will put into place, because the loophole that creates So if I'm an EU27, EU26 producer, then obviously I can take advantage of the unfettered access NI to GB by getting my product routed through Ireland and then into Northern Ireland and essentially entering it into free circulation in Northern Ireland and then getting it into GB. So there needs to be some sort of and anti-avoidance mechanism in place, and that's what the government will be coming up with. But other than that, there will be no restrictions. And
regardless, the Trader Support Service won't be dealing with that anyway, I suppose, is the short answer to that too.
Right.
What about process for goods returns from GB? So a manufacturer here sends something to a supplier or a customer in GB, say it's faulty, say there's a problem with the customer. What happens at that point?
Yeah, that is a good question, because technically, without anything further on that, technically the goods going from GB to NI in that case would be subject to the rules, would be subject to the need for customs declarations, and of course that doesn't make any sense if you've got the flow going that way. We've been considering actually quite a lot the other situation where you've got product going into Northern Ireland, which is then returned to GB, where there isn't so much of a issue. But let us take that. That's a very interesting question to which there needs to be an answer. So let us take that one back.
Sure.
And see if we can come up with an answer to that.
It's also going to probably depend on the nature of those goods as well. So typically consumer goods returns might not be subject to that process, but we need to think about that one a bit more, I think.
So we could have a scenario. The weather isn't always bright and sunny and tropical as it is today here, Frank. Mm-hmm. But we do have a scenario where fresh food, bread, for instance, would leave Northern Ireland, travel across the Irish Sea on a ferry to make a 7 or 11 minute window slot in a supermarket's distribution center. Mm-hmm. But if the ferries are stopped because of bad weather or whatever the case may be, those goods are just automatically returned. They're rejected by the customer and they have to come back again. So I think that is a route and a problem that needs some sort of thinking around in some respects.
Yeah.
A couple of questions in here just about that kind of repayment of potential tariffs. So one of the things that is still unknown from the UK government is this system of tariff reimbursement, if it were appropriate. And I suppose the short answer to that is until the UK actually agree at the joint committee with the EU around the tariff issue in the Irish Sea, they can't put out a system or a process that allows businesses to understand how they access that reimbursement piece. So unfortunately, I don't think you or anyone else has an answer to that just at the moment. What is the process for part works in progress orders? Goods sent ex-NI to GB for work and then returned to NI for final processes. We have a number of companies who even just within their own business would make stuff here, ship to their sister facility in GB, bring it back here for final processing, or vice versa, as the case may be. So that's just internal within their own company. Is there a TSS involvement there at that point?
Yeah, I think so. I think depending on the nature of the routes again. So if they're moving back the way from GB to NI, one of the potential ways to handle that is from customs warehouse to warehouse. So you would have a suspended duty process, but it would still need a declaration, I'm afraid, or a transit of some sort. Yeah. So it's always that route back that would carry some sort of processing requirement. But again, in addition to that, it's this at-risk process. So as long as there's evidence of the goods being in some sort of processing status and phase, then that transit process or that warehousing process might be beneficial. And again, once the goods are manufactured, once you've got the final product, if they reside in Northern Ireland, and we're getting a lot this question of, right, I'm assembling a product, I might move it backwards and forwards across the sea, and then I finally distribute it from depots in Northern Ireland either to Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, or back to GB or even further apart afield. What happens then? So it's that complex process of making sure that you're not paying or being liable for any duties of the multiple movement back from GB to NI. So I think first of all, it's something that needs to be mapped out carefully for those organisations, so there's a clear understanding of what the movements are, and then for each of that is to break down each of those movements for the minimum disruption or minimum impact, because at some point, if the goods are created in Northern Ireland, then depending on what their destination is going to be, they could be deemed at risk if the tariffs are due. So that does need to be broken down step by step.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is, as Frank sort of alluded to, that this may well be the candidate movements for not at risk, where you'd have an easier
in process. Yeah.
So we've got about 11 minutes left and 14 questions. So quick fire round coming up for you all. The technical one, beyond my capability or my knowledge to start with, how will current EUR1 certs / GSP certs for duty suspension work for imports into Northern Ireland after the 1st of January?
So those are the transit procedures, and basically they'll be pretty much the same as they are for EU today. So, and again, depending on the routes, but typically GB to NI, we can cover those routes on the TSS.
Here's a quick one for you. Is there a dummy site to test various options that are relevant for an individual company? So that's those kind of journeys, I suppose.
Just going through that at the moment. So there'll be more news on that, and I'm just working through that test capability and dummy uploads. So hopefully that will be announced sometime in November.
Okay.
I'll come back to you on that one.
Okay. Can an individual register for the TSS for the training to make sure they can get access to the training?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, nothing stopping you doing that. A lot of the fields are you're not obligated to fill out most of the voluntary fields, like VAT numbers and the ORIs, etc. So you can put minimal data
in. There's some issues here around concern around country of origin and whether Northern Ireland will have its own country of origin status. And it complicates. So if you bring GB product into Northern Ireland that's then sold on to freely circulate in the EU single market, how will origin be calculated at that point?
Well, in terms of origin, once the product has landed and in Northern Ireland from GB and it's gone through the customs processes and so forth, it is deemed to be in free circulation in Northern Ireland. And if it's in free circulation in Northern Ireland, it is not subject to customs processes elsewhere in the EU.
So if I make a product that costs £10,000 for want of a figure to a Southern Irish or a German or French customer, but that product is made up of £9,000 worth of GB goods.
Yeah,
we're still in the clear.
So the answer to the question turns on the rule of origin. Well, first of all, it turns on the rule of origin chapter of the EU-UK FTA. If there is a EU-UK FTA, obviously if there isn't one, then there's no preferential rate to be discussed anyway. But if there is one, and the question then is, what has happened to the product in Northern Ireland to confer Northern Ireland origin, or as opposed to GB? And that will depend on the substantial transformation, change in tariff classification, those kinds of things. And it will turn on what the actual agreement says.
So we're hoping for a UK EU FTA would make life a lot simpler for everybody on this call.
It would also need to be a UK EU FTA with liberal rules of origin. So you don't want to have very restrictive rules of origin, and you want to maximize things like accumulation and the UK proposal on rules of origin is even diagonal accumulation, which is accumulation across all the agreements that the UK and the EU have. And actually, if you look at the UK-Japan agreement, it does contain elements of diagonal accumulation. So unfortunately, we won't know the answer to this until we know that there's a deal.
Okay. I thought we had this one answered, but it may be slightly different. So does TSS cover requirements for GB to NI and then on to ROI? So a scenario could well be that a supplier in Scotland is supplying a Northern Ireland company, but it has a subsidiary in the Republic of Ireland. And essentially it's just bouncing through Northern Ireland to get to the Republic of Ireland. So does TSS cover all that piece for them?
Well, again, sorry, Frank.
No, I was going to say typically it wouldn't, because you're exporting to the EU in that scenario. So it's not a GB to NI movement. That would require us setting up an import declaration into the EU, and an export declaration at GB as well.
So if the company in NI did the invoicing and made the order, et cetera, and then they just had an intercompany exchange between NI and ROI, it would be covered though. Is that right?
If it's entering free circulation in Northern Ireland, then it would be covered. It would be a GB NI movement. But if it's in transit, it would not be. These
are not easy questions, are they? Because if it's technically going from GB directly to ROI, and we know that's happening, then it's an export to an EU country. So it would have to have an export certificate at GB. So if you imagine that journey being from Holyhead to Dublin, that's an export from GB, an import into Republic of Ireland. If products are moving from GB to Northern Ireland, it's just an import process into Northern Ireland. There's no equivalent export, so they're quite different processes. But I can see the challenge with this one.
Yeah, because particularly here in Derry, there's a lot of businesses working on across.
Do that. Yeah.
I'll try to do some quick fire. I think I'm getting to the bottom. People keep adding more questions, but we're running out of time, sadly. I just wanted to double check. I've registered for TSS, so will I now automatically receive an EORI number? Or do I still have to register for that separately? I think that goes back to a question earlier where Shankar said there was auto enrollment on the 23rd of November.
Yes, that's right. So the issue on EORI numbers is you will need, in order to do an import declaration into the Northern Ireland, into the EU-facing systems like CDS, which is the one that will be used for Northern Ireland, you will need what's called an XI EORI number, which is not a different EORI number from the GB EORI number. It is it's the GB EORI number with the XI prefix, but you need that process to be done, because if you don't have this XI EORI number, you won't be able to do that import process. So people will actually need these two, one number with a prefix. I'll just call them two numbers. But you will need both of those. And the way to get the XI EORI number is to be registered on TSS so that you can then auto enroll. It's just an easier. It doesn't mean you can't get it any other way. It's a much easier process, and you don't have to worry about it. Whereas if you're not doing that, you will have to worry about a manual assignment of an XI prefix.
There's new guidance on government websites. So gov.uk/EORI's just published more information on the XI EORI process.
And I published that earlier in the chat function that's on this. There's a direct link to that. Trying to get through as many as we can here. So will this be similar to the current EMCS and TTT system for excisable goods, in that the consignor raises a movement and the consignee accepts on a website or portal?
So I missed the beginning of that question, Stephen.
So is this system similar to the current EMCS and TTT system for excisable goods? So that's the relationship, the consignor raises the movement and the consignee accepts on a portal. So it's on a digital system rather than anything else.
It's very similar. Yeah. The concept's very similar.
Yeah. The EMCS is a management sort of system, and I guess it is similar to that.
There's a question here about raising good raw materials from Holland into Northern Ireland and which routes. I think the answer to that's probably not available to you guys. It's not that you look after that specifically, but it's probably advice that a customs broker or a freight forwarder or Intertrade Ireland can potentially assist with. Can owners of goods based in GB with a UK VAT number still ship directly to an MNI warehouse from the EU directly and then delivered to customers in ROI freely? So there's a complex one for you. So the owner of the goods is based in GB with a UK VAT number.
Yeah.
A customer in the Republic of Ireland orders it and it's shipped from the EU to Ireland. And is there any requirement for you guys? I suppose that's the transit piece again, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm not sure if the question relates to the movement of goods, which would be one thing, or whether it relates to the VAT situation and what would be claimable or not claimable on VAT. And the latter is not something that TSS would operationally support. You'll have to look at the guidance that's coming out of the HMRC on the VAT side of things. But if it's a goods movement, then it doesn't matter what matters is where the goods are moving. So if the goods movement is Netherlands to ROI, and it's you can do that in one or two ways. You're either doing it directly, in which case no declaration is required, or you're doing it as a transit movement through the UK, in which case a transit T2 is required.
Okay. A Northern Ireland wholesaler, I sell a customer here goods from GB, and can they assume the wholesaler has dealt with the declarations? I think the answer to that's yes. They wouldn't have come from GB into Northern Ireland to the wholesaler without this custom stuff having been done originally. I'm trying to get a short one here. Given we purchase goods from GB and move to MNI, and then they are subject to duties if we incorporate those goods into products we make. So this is the question about what's at risk and where the tariff responsibility is picked up. The short answer to that is that if you bring stuff from GB into Northern Ireland that can freely circulate only in Northern Ireland, there's no tariff responsibility. If that stuff's returned to GB, there's no tariff responsibility. But if those goods go potentially to the Republic of Ireland, then there may be a tariff responsibility at that point. And that process and that system still is yet to be made available to businesses here.
Yeah.
It's 4:30. We have a number of other questions. I don't think we're going to get through them all, unfortunately. Colleagues of mine have taken note of all the questions. We'll try to get some sort of answers to them. We'll certainly be sharing them with Frank and Shankar and their teams because I think it's useful for them to understand the complex integrated routes that people may particularly have. And if we can design out the problems at the start, that means that come the 1st or 2nd of January, things are a lot smoother. Can I thank both Frank and Shankar for, firstly, an enormous amount of their time. Secondly, for their insight and presentation and answering some questions that I think were impossible to answer. And hopefully it's brought some more clarity. As I said at the beginning, the recording of this and the slides will be made available. We're going to take all those questions and try to provide some answers to them after this event as well. Yeah. And just to thank both you guys and at one point 188 people that were online watching for coming along, and keep a look in your inbox for the recordings and slides in the next day or so.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks very much.